really the third day would have to be sometime between 48 and 72 hours, right? So if you died on Friday afternoon, the maximum time you could have been in the tomb would have been about 38 hours or so, according to my calculations. I've got fewer charts than normal, but my charts are really, really dense. We're going to do a graduate level course this morning. We could easily spend a semester on, but we're going to do it in about 30 minutes. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about the relationship between the Jewish Passover and Jesus' crucifixion. The Synoptic Gospels and the Gospel of John don't really jibe with each other, okay? Now, we can reconcile some of that. We're hopefully going to do that today. But as we go through, I think you'll see what I'm talking about. So I tell you, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. Because if you're paying attention, you'll say, huh? And then hopefully as I get a little bit farther along, you'll say, oh, okay, that makes sense. I can understand why that's that way. Pay attention. Again, we're doing a graduate level course in about 30 minutes. There we are. We can either put our heads in the sand or we can get wrapped around the axle. Those are our two choices in life on a lot of things. We can do it the hard way or the easy way. Okay, we're going to choose the hard way today. Thank you, Kenny, for that for that very fine. In hindsight, I was thinking maybe I should have had you do an AI of me putting my head in the sand. But anyway, so we will cover the bush not shaking, the path not taken, the soup not making, the biscuits not baking, the garden not raking. Sometimes when I do charts, I get a little carried away, maybe a little bit, and I think, oh, raking, that's a good one. I like that. So this really is a graduate level course. As I mentioned, we'll cover in just a few minutes when Jesus had his Last Supper, when Jesus was arrested, and when Jesus was crucified, some possibilities. I'm going to ask you not to ask questions so we can get through this. If we have time at the end, this is my last class, by the way.
Are you laying under?
I said not to ask questions. All right. To whoever stole my antidepressants, I hope you're happy. All right. Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Very confusing time, very confusing feast, okay? Passover, Pesach, okay? And the Feast of Unleavened Bread were once separate events. Let's read about it in the Bible, in Leviticus. In the first month, on the 14th day of Nisan, at twilight, there should be a Passover offering to the Lord. And on the 15th day of Nisan, that same month, is the festival of unleavened bread to the Lord. For 7 days you'll eat unleavened bread. On the first day you'll have a holy convocation. You shall not work at your occupations. Sabbath, that screams Sabbath to me, okay? That's called a High Sabbath to the Jews, all right? For 7 days you'll present the Lord's offering by fire. On the seventh day, there shall be a holy convocation. Sabbath, High Sabbath on the seventh day. First day of the festival of unleavened bread, Sabbath, High Sabbath. The last day of the festival, a High Sabbath, okay? You shall not work at your occupations. Passover starts somewhere between, always every year, starts between March 26th and April 25th. Any year you pick, it always starts. Now, we talked about the Jewish calendar versus the Gregorian calendar several times. So y'all know all that. Y'all understand all that. We're trying to sync up a lunar calendar to a solar calendar, and they don't really line up with each other. In 2025, Passover Eve was on Saturday, March 12th, which started on Friday evening, okay? And the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread was Sunday, April 13th, starting Saturday evening. All right. So, listen very carefully. This is going to be an important point later on. April 12th of 2025, the regular Sabbath was followed by an April 13th Shabbat, a high Shabbat on Sunday. Okay, 2 Shabbats in a row, a Saturday Shabbat and a Sunday Shabbat. Does that make sense? Regular Shabbat on Saturday, a high Shabbat on Sunday, because it was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Everybody with me so far? You got to understand that before we go any further. I'm seeing some nods. If you don't understand that, get with the people who are nodding. Okay. 2 Shabbats in a row, what does this mean? We'll talk about that in just a second. The April 19th regular Shabbat coincided with the high Shabbat of the last day of the day of Passover. Passover is confusing. When people talk of Passover, it really, after the Babylonian captivity, it really got combined into one thing. Passover, which is really just a short period of time where the Seder is eaten, okay, got combined with the festival of unleavened bread, okay? That was all combined. In fact, Erev Pesach, the Passover Eve, was really combining that also into this whole thing called Passover. That's what we call Passover Day. When my camera place is closed, who are run by Jews, I can't order camera equipment, they're in Passover. That's what they call it, Passover, that whole week of Passover, okay? It's really the festival of unleavened bread, Okay, Passover being the first little sliver of time at the end of Passover Eve, or Erev Pesach, into the beginning of Nisan 15, the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread. Everybody with me so far? Even if you're not, don't care. It's a graduate course. We're doing it in 25 minutes. So, all right. So, I'm going to show you this chart again, but gather as much as you can from it so far. Today, we talk about Passover being this entire thing. Erev Pesach, okay, Passover Eve. The Seder was essentially Passover, the end of Erev Pesach into the beginning of the first day of Unleavened Bread. That is Passover. It's not a day, it's a time. Good? All right. I've studied this a lot. I'm not sure if I have all the answers, and it's a really confusing subject, but stick with me and I'll take dissension. I mean, if you have other ideas about all this, I'll take them, just not during class today. After class, I'll take dissension. All right. So, day 1 is a High Sabbath. Day 7 is a High Sabbath. Okay. Day 1 is Nisan 15th, the Festival of Unleavened Bread, now called Passover. Okay. The whole week called Passover. All right. Some places add a day 8 to this. I'll explain why they do that here in just a minute. I'm going to do this again here in just a minute because we're going to learn some more stuff and we're going to come back to it and you'll say, oh, that kind of makes more sense now. All right. Day 2 also starts the start of the waving of the Omer. We talked about that as a festival. Remember that? Everybody remember that? I'm sure they do. Oh, waving of the Omer. Okay. That's when they went to the temple and the priest would literally wave an Omer of barley. They wave it up and down, side to side, front and back at the temple. Okay. An offering of this Omer, which is a weight of barley. Okay. Back then, it was an actual waving of an Omer at the temple. The temple was destroyed in AD 70. We no longer do the waving, but we still do the counting. Okay. So it's called the counting of the Omer today, starting day 2 of the Feast of what we call Passover, which is really the Festival of Unleavened Bread. All right. I've beat that enough now. All right. Phew. Okay. Class dismissed. I'm worn out. Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, 2 of 2. Nisan 14 was a Erev Pesach. The beginning hours of Nisan 14 begins after sundown, the end of Nisan 13. So we're talking about the really true beginning of Nisan 14. Okay? That day, that time, that full day is customarily set aside to remove all traces of leaven in the Jewish home. We've heard that all of our lives. You got to get rid of the leaven because of the celebration of the festival of what happened. Okay? The leaven package is burned the next morning, mid-Nisan 14. Okay, the Passover lambs are executed, killed, likely between 3 and 5 p.m. after the afternoon sacrifice at the temple, and the meat was then eaten that night by the people who brought the offerings. Okay, this was while the temple was still standing. They don't do that today. Some Jews want to do that today. I think the Jewish authorities kind of frown on that, but some people actually still do that today. So, a day of preparation for the High Sabbath of the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread. Okay. This nomenclature is very important to pay attention. The day of preparation was Erev Pesach, Passover Eve. When I say Passover Eve, I'm not talking about the eve before the day of Passover. I'm talking about the eve before the feast of Passover. Okay? Seder, that we've talked about already. All right. Everybody with me so far? All right. Passover Seder, we read about that in Leviticus 23. Passover, as I mentioned, is more of a time period than a day. Spans the end of Nisan 14th, the beginning of Nisan 15. The Jews ate during the temple period the lamb that had been sacrificed earlier for them in that day. Okay, Nisan 15 through 21, as I mentioned, are the Festival of Unleavened Bread. A High Sabbath occurs at the beginning and end, as I mentioned already. Nisan 16 was the waving of the Omer and the starting of the counting of the Omer. 50 days between Passover. I'm using that term very loosely now. From Passover, we talk about in sermons and whatever. We talk about 50 days from Passover to Pentecost. That's when the counting of the Omer was happening. The waving of the Omer in the temple period and the counting of the Omer today. Okay, that's all. We're going home. All right. Nope, there's not. There's more. Now, I have this tendency to want to look at different versions, what they say about things. Okay, so I looked at the 60 whatever versions I have. Maybe not as many back then when I did this. And I looked at the definition of Passover when they're talking about Passover. So the left column has the longest definition of Passover. Okay. Young's translation says in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evenings is the Passover to Jehovah. That sounds like a long time. That sounds like a day, right? Well, to the Jews back then, between the evenings is more of nomenclature from the sun peaking, okay, to the setting. So from noon to sunset. That's not my reasoning or anything. I've just read that somewhere. So from noon to sunset, so the afternoon of Nisan 14. Okay. The middle column, which is the predominant column, narrows it down some more. Okay. It denotes the beginning of Passover evening. If I look at all those different translations, it says things like at twilight, at even, at the evening tide, at sundown, when the sun goes down, at nightfall. Okay. Those are all the definitions of when Passover is happening. Okay. In those definitions, that same verse, but that's kind of the definition they give. The shortest definition is in the Complete Jewish Bible. And it says, which encompasses minutes instead of hours. It says, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the sundown and complete darkness comes Pesach, okay, for Passover, for the Lord. I think the Complete Jewish Bible is probably the most accurate rendition, in my estimation, of these different versions. And the Jews should know their holidays, right? Okay, so it's in the the Complete Jewish Bible. So I like this definition. I'll read it again. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between sundown and complete darkness. Well, now, when did the next day start? When you saw the first 3 stars. Remember that? Okay. When is complete darkness? Well, it's after that, right? Passover is between sundown and, oh, by the way, we start a new day, and then we have complete darkness. So we're doing some Passover on Nisan 14, and we're doing some Seder. Okay, we're doing some Passover Seder on Nisan 14, and we're doing some more on Nisan 15. So this Passover spans these 2 days, Nisan 14 and Nisan 15. Everybody good? Yeah, okay. All right. So what can we conclude regarding Passover? And I'll put that in quotes, okay, because I'm talking about more generally. All right. Passover observance was not so much a days. It was a period of time of the Passover Seder. The period happened in the last part of Nisan 14 and the Nisan 15. The killing of the Paschal lambs occurred earlier in the day, probably between 3 and 5 p.m., Josephus tells us, and it was probably after the regular afternoon sacrifices of the temple. Since Jewish days began as the first 3 stars appeared in the evening, it was an observed phenomenon, okay, as opposed to being mathematically determined like it is today. The priest would actually sit out there and look up in the sky and say, oh, yea, verily, it's a new moon, okay, and this is the beginning of Nisan, or Tishri, or whatever month it was, okay. Thus, Nisan 15, the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread, started when these 3 stars appeared during the Passover observance. So during the Seder is when the Festival of Unleavened Bread started. I know I'm going fast. It's what I do, okay? The traditional Passover Seder typically would begin just before sundown on Nisan 14. I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit. That was at the very end of Nisan 14, after the Passover lamb was slain earlier that day, would continue the first part of Nisan 15 into that night. And therefore, the day of Passover, which is a term very loosely used, spans the end of Nisan 14 and continues in Nisan 15, which is also the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. All right. So I think y'all get that. I think y'all get where I'm coming from on that. But it's taken a lot of study on my part to get to that. And maybe y'all knew that already. I don't know. So as if things were not complicated enough, Passover Eve, or Erev Pesach, is also Nisan 14, just before sundown. So that was, Erev Pesach was the day of preparation for Passover. Okay. For the Seder that night. There's that term again, the day of preparation. Okay. We're going to see that here in just a minute. Now, put the chart back up again for you to hope you've been studying it the whole time I've been talking, because you never listen to me anyway. You just look off in space and study charts. So anyway, it's there again, and we're going to maybe come back to that if we need to later. All right. So here's some example of Passover dates in 2025. Nisan 14 in 2025 was Friday evening, April 11th, through Saturday sundown of April 12th. This is when they searched for leaven. Starting in the evening of Friday evening, they started searching for leaven. There was no more leading of leaven. After about 10 a.m., leaven was burned, usually about 11 a.m., and then the Seder began around sundown. Nisan 15 is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It was a high Sabbath, as I mentioned, often denoted as the first day of Passover. Nisan 16, the second day of Passover, the starting of the waving of the Omer. Okay. Nisan 17, the second day of the waving of the Omer. 18, 19, 20, 21 was a high Sabbath. Nisan 21 was a high Sabbath. Okay. Nisan 22 was the extra day of Passover added outside Israel. Why? That doesn't make any sense. Why would they add an extra day of Passover outside of Israel? I'll tell you. I like the questions y'all are asking me. That's good. All right, studying Last Supper dates. In the 3 synoptic Gospels, you know what those are? Matthew, Mark, and Luke, okay? In the three synoptic gospels, the Last Supper appears to have been the Passover meal or the Seder at the end of Nisan 14 to the first part of Nisan 15. So in Mark 14, we read on the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, Erev Pesach, okay, Passover Eve, his disciples said to him, where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you to eat the Passover? It sounds an awful lot like they're talking to Jesus about eating Passover Seder that night, okay? John disagrees. The non-synoptic gospel of John disagrees. He seems to show that Last Supper was before the traditional Passover meal, okay? Jesus washed the disciples' feet before the festival of Passover, okay? Well, that doesn't tell us much, but at Jesus' final trial before Pilate, notice the timeline here. At Jesus' final trial before Pilate, the Jews did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid the ritual defilement and be able to eat the Passover, okay? So Jesus' trial in John's account is happening on Erev Pesach, because they didn't want to defile themselves before the Passover Seder that evening, right? Okay? This seems to contradict Matthew, Mark, and Luke's account, okay? When they said, the disciples said to him, where do you want us to go and get ready for the Passover? So this had to have been before he was captured and tried and all that, right? In John's account, okay? Where do you want us to go get and make preparations for the Seder tonight? That's what Mark is saying. What do you want us to do to get ready for Seder tonight? Okay, but John's account says, oh, wait, he was already arrested and being tried on his day of trial. Okay, the Jews did not enter the headquarters, but so to avoid being defiled for the Passover Seder that night. Seems like a direct contradiction. Go read them. Go read the verses. Seems like a contradiction between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, I don't think there is. That's why I need to finish today. That's why I'm saying, please don't ask questions so I can finish today, because I don't want to leave any doubt in your mind about what's going on. John also says it was the Jewish day of preparation, Erev Pesach, okay, when they were getting ready to bury Jesus after the crucifixion. The day of preparation was for the High Sabbath. That was to occur on Nisan 15, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, okay? You got to prepare for a Sabbath. If you're not prepared for a Sabbath, you can't do anything on Sabbath. You can't work. You can't walk. You can't travel. You can't do anything, so you better be prepared. So Erev Pesach was the day of preparation. According to this timeline, Jesus was being crucified at the same time as the Passover lambs were being sacrificed at the temple. That's kind of interesting. All these texts point to a meal one full day before the regular Seder. That's maybe a contradiction of what you've been taught all your life. Okay? Is there a contradiction? Don't think so. Let's go on. No gospel writers mention the other two required components of the Seder specified in Exodus, the bitter herbs and the roasted lamb. There were certain components you had to have in your Seder meal. Herbs and lamb. They didn't have it. What did they have? Bread and wine. Was it a Seder? No, I have no idea. Now, you can go and you can read lots of articles, like in Biblical Archaeology Review. They have an actual article that says, was the Last Supper a Seder? So you can go read that article. And that's what I've done, along with several others in doing this study. Okay? John's timeline makes much sense because the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread, 15 Nisan, was a high Sabbath. Always a high Sabbath. It was dictated in Leviticus, I believe. Okay? No matter the day of the week. The Passover meal was eaten at the end of Nisan 14, the beginning of Nisan 15. Crucifixion would not have been allowed on the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread. Right? It would not have been allowed. It was a high Sabbath. Why were they wanting to break the legs of the criminals? Why were they wanting to break Jesus' legs? They found that he was already dead. Why were they wanting to break the legs of the criminals? Because it was getting ready to turn nightfall for Sabbath. Now, we always think of Sabbath being Saturday. No, it was a high Sabbath. Can a high Sabbath be on something not a Saturday? Yes, it was this year. In 2025. That opens up a possibility. Here we go. Now, a commentary I've read in the past quite a bit, I think he's Methodist, I'm not sure, but he says every candid person must allow that there are great difficulties relative to the time in which our Lord ate the Passover with his disciples. I think he's got a good point there. And you'll see kind of a similar indication throughout whatever commentary you read. They say it's kind of difficult to really reconcile these events. If you really go in and study it, and I'm really kind of glad I took the chapter out of my book because there's other things I've kind of wanted to add and enhance. I'm not sure I really explained well enough. That's probably true of the rest of my book, or my current book. I've really kind of firmed up my understanding of this going through and studying it this time around. All right. Studying Last Supper dates. Perhaps the Last Supper was a combination of both. Okay, so do we have this contradiction between the Synoptics and John? Okay, well, it looks like it, but Perhaps it was a combination of both. Observing the moon at the beginning of a month was very difficult. If it was raining, if it was cloudy, hard to see a moon, okay? Today, we know that a lunar month is exactly 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 2 seconds long on average, right? Everybody knows that. You know that, right? Everybody knows that. All right. We know that exactly. Back then, they didn't. It was an observed phenomenon, not a calculated phenomenon like we do today. So the priests are sitting there looking up in the sky, and it's raining. And they're saying, the new moon is supposed to be right about now, but it might be tomorrow. We don't know. It was raining yesterday, too. It could have been yesterday. We don't know. Oh, dear, what are we going to do? Well, they know it's about 29 and a half days, okay? So they could probably peg it within a day, but what if it was off? What if it was off? So sometimes the beginning of a month was a day late. Could be a day's difference between the time of celebration event during the month and when it should have been celebrated, okay? Since Passover was such an important holiday, the Jews were allowed to celebrate it early, or perhaps even twice to ensure they celebrated it on the correct day. Interesting. There's evidence that the Sanhedrin, even if they found out that they were wrong in choosing the first day of the month, still bound everyone to follow the feast scheduled on the first incorrect day. Interesting. Okay. Thus, Jesus and his disciples may have been following the correct day, while the other Jews may have been following the Sanhedrin mandated day. Interesting. Maybe two Seders going on here, two different Seders, because of this ambiguity of the beginning of the month. The rabbis declared, we can read this, that whenever the day was doubtful, the Jews could celebrate Passover with the same ceremonies on both days, which could have been the case that particular year. Okay, this is why Passover is celebrated 8 days outside Israel and was only celebrated for 7 days within Israel. Okay, back then they had both a communication problem and a day of the month problem. Okay, when the priest looked up and said, "Yea, very, it's a new moon." Okay. So Israel would know that. They would declare it from the top of the Temple Mount or whatever. Okay, it's a new moon, first of the month, so that would dictate when Nisan 15 was, based on when Nisan 1 was, right? Okay, if you're in Egypt, you got a little guy running, it's Passover. So they gave an extra day for people outside Israel. And I've always wondered why, as I wrote my book, I wondered why do they always add a day for some of these festivals? Okay, why is it 8 days outside Israel instead of 7 days? That's the reason. It's a communication problem and a day of the month problem. Okay, when does the day of the month start? If it's raining, I don't know. I know it's about 29 and a half days, but I observe that. I don't have my calculator yet. All right. Now, and still some people outside Israel still celebrate the 8-day Passover also. And we don't have any communication problems today or day of the month problems today. The massive number of lambs we killed. Josephus tells on one occasion, over 250,000, 250,000 lambs were sacrificed on Passover. That's a whole lot of animals. That's a whole lot of blood. Perhaps the Jews were allowed to eat Passover meal anytime during the 24 hours of Nisan 14. It may have been impossible for the priest to have killed so many animals on one altar during 3 to 5. The priest may have killed lambs for 2 days straight. Given the above points, the biblical accounts are consistent. Jesus and apostles may have had their Passover meal at the beginning of Nisan 14, okay? And other Jews were getting ready to have their meal at the beginning of Nisan 15. So Nisan 14, when it's kind of winding down and getting ready to go into the festival, as I said, the Passover Seder overlaps 14 to 15. Okay. Perhaps no one ate Passover during the crucifixion, after the crucifixion. Okay. Let's say you're sitting down for your Christmas dinner, and there's earthquakes, and there's darkness, and Aunt Maud goes by, who's been dead for 30 years. Maud, what's going on? Would you continue your dinner? I wouldn't. I would say, Maud, what's going on? Why are you raised from the dead? Didn't you die 30 years ago? Perhaps no one ate Seder that night. There was some really serious stuff going on that night, that afternoon. Okay? Interesting things to think about. Therefore, those who ate the Passover meal early were perhaps the only ones to have done so that year. All right. Which Sabbath? Ooh, we're running out of time. After Jesus died on the cross, John tells us since it was the day of preparation, there's that day again, the day of preparation, Erev Pesach. The Jews did not want the bodies to be left on the cross during the Sabbath, especially because that Sabbath, John says, that Sabbath was a day of great solemnity. Why would John say that Sabbath? Why would he say that Sabbath instead of the Sabbath? Okay, well, because that Sabbath was a high Sabbath, the first day of unleavened bread. We know that a Sabbath and a high Sabbath can follow, or vice versa. Okay. So 7 Sabbaths, 7 high Sabbaths total that are dictated in the Bible. Therefore, the high Sabbath could have occurred on a Friday, starting Thursday evening. Just Jesus' crucifixion could have been preceding this on Thursday instead of Friday. Oh, I see a nod. Oh, bless you for nodding, because I'm thinking, okay, that statement's going to get people rankled. If you are a big guy about Good Friday, I know Catholics and other high religion people are big about Good Friday. This is going to blow you out of the water. You're not going to be happy with me. Okay? I think there's some good evidence that it might have been on Thursday instead of Friday. Okay? Because they were preparing for the Sabbath, the high Sabbath, which may have been on Friday instead of Saturday. All right, 2 Sabbaths in a row. The breaking blades of 2 criminals, the piercing of Jesus' side, were prompted by the upcoming high Sabbath, perhaps on Friday. A Thursday or Friday crucifixion. Now, if you look at the biblical text, they always talk about the day of preparation. When the evening had come, and since it was the day of preparation, this is mine, that is the day before the Sabbath. Which Sabbath, we don't know. Okay? We have some evidence in a minute that it's a special Sabbath, something John tells us, but let's go ahead. So anyway, but the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea wanted to bury the body of Jesus, right? Okay, the day before the Sabbath. Which Sabbath? I think it was the high Sabbath. Well, it was a high Sabbath. So it was definitely the high Sabbath coming up. There's no question about that. Okay, whether it was the Sabbath, that high Sabbath overlapped with the Saturday Sabbath, which is called a double Sabbath to Jews, or if they were separate days, Friday, Saturday, we don't know yet, but let me present some other evidence. Okay, so almost everyone assumes that this day before the standard Sabbath, starting Friday evening, forgets about high Sabbath, like the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread. Jesus was very clear about how long he would be in the tomb. This has always been kind of a concern of mine, even from when I was a little kid. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so for 3 days and 3 nights the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth. Matthew says that. As they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and on the 3rd day he will be raised. Now, if you're a mathematician, if you say I'm on the 3rd day I'm going to be raised, that means that really the 3rd day would have to be sometime between 48 and 72 hours, right? Am I doing that math right? Have to be sometime between 48 and 72 hours beyond when he said that. On the 3rd day I'll be raised, sometime 48 to 72 hours later, because that is the 3rd day. 1 day later will be 24 hours, 48 hours, 3rd day, 48 to 72. All right, everybody with me so far? Good. All right. So if he died on Friday afternoon, the maximum time he could have been in the tomb would have been about 38 hours or so, according to my calculations. Okay. There are other places in the gospel that back this up. All through the gospels. 3 days, the 3rd day, after 3 days, etc. All right. So that gives some more credence, I think, to a Thursday afternoon crucifixion. Let's use another example. The Mary Magdalene example that I'm going to show you doesn't really preclude either a Thursday or a Friday crucifixion. Okay, it supports both. Let me tell you what I mean. Mary would have been very anxious, I think, to go anoint Jesus. Okay, that's what they did back then. They anointed the dead bodies. Okay, she would have been very anxious to do that. But why didn't she do it? Why did she wait till Sunday? Well, if he'd been crucified on a Friday, okay, and then we had a double Sabbath of high Sabbath, regular Sabbath on Saturday, she couldn't have gone to the tomb because he died. They put him in the tomb. It was high Sabbath. It was high Sabbath / double Sabbath, okay? Or high Sabbath, normal Sabbath, double Sabbath, if you assume the Friday crucifixion. So the earliest she could have gone to the tomb would be Sunday morning, right? Because you can't travel around. You can't do what you want to on Sabbath. You're restricted. And, I mean, over there, they don't even let you they don't even want to press elevator buttons and things like that. Some really strict Orthodox Jews don't let you do anything like that. So you don't travel around on the Sabbath, okay? If he died on a Thursday, wait a minute. Wait, couldn't she have anointed him on Friday? No, the answer is no. If it was a high Sabbath on Friday, if he died Thursday and they buried him Thursday evening, the night, okay, we go into Friday, which is a high Sabbath. She couldn't travel during that Friday. Then we go into Saturday of a normal Sabbath. She couldn't travel during that Saturday. So the first time she could travel the tomb, Sunday morning. So the theory of Thursday crucifixion we don't have any problems with that in that particular regard either. Okay? Now, we also see that John tells us that 6 days before the Passover, which has to be Erev Pesach, okay, the preparation of Passover for that evening, okay, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So if Jesus died on a Friday, Erev Pesach, and he would have traveled from Ephraim to Bethany on a previous Saturday, a Sabbath, contrary to Jewish law. Let's count the days. Friday, okay? 6 days before Passover. So Friday, Thursday, that's one day. So he would have traveled, if we're talking about a crucifixion on Friday. So Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, Sunday, Saturday, 6 days. Illegal. You can't travel on a Sabbath. Right? 15 miles, that's beyond the length of travel for a Sabbath. Okay? If he died on a Thursday, a Ref Pesach Thursday, Wednesday, we're counting backwards, Tuesday, Monday, Sunday, Saturday, Friday. He traveled on Friday. That's perfectly legal. That's not a Sabbath. As long as you travel before nightfall, right? Because that's when Sabbath starts, at the first 3 stars. Okay? If you go to Jerusalem today, it starts a little earlier than that. They start really kind of shutting down kind of late afternoon. All right. That gives another, I think, confirmation of the theory that he probably died on Thursday. All right. So some other things to ponder. So, assuming he traveled from Ephraim to Bethany on a Friday, the 7th of Nisan, perhaps he rested in Bethany on a Saturday, a Sabbath, before coming to Jerusalem on Sunday, which makes sense. I mean, Sabbath, you rest. All right. Now, I'm going to read the passage to you in just a minute. I'm going to kind of show you what I think is how it lays out. But let me present a couple of theories to you. So there appears to possibly be a day between the anointing by Mary and Jesus' travel to Jerusalem on Sunday. All right. So I think he probably rested in Bethany on Saturday. Okay. The anointing by Mary was sometime after dinner. So we see John 12:2 says they gave a dinner for him. Okay. So we assume that anointing was after dinner. Okay. So it would have been sometime that night. All right. After the anointing, a great crowd came to see Lazarus. Now, I think it was unlikely a great crowd came to see Lazarus that night. I think probably the great crowd came the next day, okay, during Jesus' day of rest in Bethany. I'll show you the passage here in just a minute and let you draw your own conclusions, okay? And, okay, bullet number 2, if he were crucified on Friday, why would the gospel writers not have written anything about Jesus' activities on Wednesday and most of Thursday of the crucifixion week? The gospel writers, all 4 of them, talked extensively about crucifixion week. This whole week, detail after detail, the fig tree, the cursing of the fig tree, the cleansing of the temple, all these details, all the stuff that they're writing about. Why would they completely leave a total blank of almost 2 days in the text? Well, that's what you have. There's no other way to fit it in, timeline-wise, if you have a Friday crucifixion. However, if you have a Thursday crucifixion, you have a very much shorter period of time. You have just a partial day when Jesus rested. I'll talk about that in just a minute. I'll show you the 2 different timelines, Thursday crucifixion, Friday crucifixion, let you draw your own conclusions, okay? Now, but if the crucifixion were on Thursday, the period with no recorded events would be much shorter, as I mentioned. The presentation of the lambs to the temple priests may have occurred at the same time Jesus presented himself as the Messiah. Okay, I will show you that on the timeline as well, okay, if he was crucified on a Thursday. So a lot of things are lining up, but you can argue with me. I mean, people watching on YouTube, I'm sure you're going to argue with me that it's on Friday no matter what. There's Good Friday, and that's the way the Catholic Church has set it up, and that's the way it is. That's fine. That's fine. It's a theory. It doesn't matter at all to your salvation, okay, whether it's Thursday or Friday. Just some interesting points, okay? Now, here we go. This is the text, John 12, 1 through 13. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany. We talked about this. If it had been Friday, he would have traveled on a Sabbath, on Saturday. Right? If Thursday, he would have traveled on a Friday, a non-Sabbath. Okay. And Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany. And they made him a supper that night, Mary, Martha, Lazarus. And then Mary anointed the feet of Jesus after dinner. That's Friday. My opinion is that's Friday. Now, this is a week before the crucifixion event. So remember, we're back up in time. We're at the very beginning of Jesus' events in Jerusalem, okay? So we're assuming Jesus came to Bethany from Ephraim on a Friday, the text in red. The text in purple, my assumption, is happening on Saturday. Much people, the Jews, therefore knew that he was there. And they came not for Jesus' sake only, but they might see Lazarus also, whom he raised from the dead. But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him, many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. There's a lot of events to happen for a Friday night, right? Because if he traveled, it's just a lot of stuff to have happened. My assumption is that these events happen on Saturday. Period in green, Sunday. On the next day, after these events on Saturday in purple, my assumption, On the next day, much people that were come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, so they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna. And we talked about Hosanna earlier in class 2 or 3 weeks ago, right? What Hosanna really means, okay? God save us, okay? And that's why probably their attitude changed within a week when they were shouting, crucify him, crucify him. We have no king but Caesar. And we talked about that true meaning of what Hosanna means, okay? So there's a possible timeline in the text of a Friday, Saturday, Sunday series of events, okay? Draw conclusions what you might. Now, let's look at some timelines. I showed you this last week. This chart is not any, I don't think I've changed anything about this chart at all. So if you remember last week, the days across the top are the way we denote days. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, starting at midnight, okay? The days down here are how Jews denote days, starting at dusk, okay, going till the next dusk. And we got the Jewish dates on there, 9 Nisan, 10 Nisan, etc., okay? Jewish events are here in blue. Christian events associated with his crucifixion and other things during the week are in red. All right. So we talked about last week, the timeline, so much stuff had to happen before. Well, anyway, we'll talk about that in just a minute as far as before the crucifixion. So the chart shows Jesus entering Jerusalem, maybe in at the same time as Pontius Pilate's entering into Jerusalem. We don't know that for sure. The Last Supper may be a day before the Passover meal, the Seder. Passover lamb was starting to be killed about the same time Jesus died, and may have been 2 days of rest in Bethany. This long bar here is the 2 days of rest in Bethany if we are talking about a Friday crucifixion. Again, why would the Gospel writers not talk about events during that time? Okay, it seems kind of unlikely that they wouldn't talk about something Jesus did during that time. Okay, that's for a Friday crucifixion. What if we shift and think about a Thursday crucifixion? Okay, so pay attention now. Just concentrate right here, just on the blue. We're going to do two different sections. We're going to do blue and we're going to do red. Concentrate just here on blue, what happens when I go to a Thursday crucifixion. All the events shift to the left. Okay, here we go. All right. Now, if we're talking about a Thursday, Erev Pesach, okay, then we have the crucifixion on Thursday instead of Friday. I'm not going to talk about this yet. So I'm wanting to, but not quite yet. All right. So notice what has shifted. Erev Pesach has shifted. Passover, a little skinny piece of time has shifted. Okay, the Passover meal Seder has shifted. And then the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread has shifted. So Erev Pesach is now on Thursday. The High Sabbath is now on Friday. And the normal Sabbath is now on Saturday. All right. Let me go back to the previous chart, and you'll see how it shifts. Okay. Notice all these events, Jewish events, shift. The presentation of the lambs shifts. The Last Supper shifts. The Passover meal shifts. Everything shifts to the left. Boom. Now notice, once we do that shift, it's possible now that these Passover lambs were presented at the same time Jesus was presented himself as the ultimate sacrifice. That's interesting. That almost kind of sends a shiver up my spine a little bit, that the Jews were doing their presentation of the sacrificial animals at the temple, and Jesus was over here presenting himself as the ultimate sacrifice for everybody's sins from then, in the past, and forward, everything universal, okay? May have been happening at the same time. We don't know, but it could have, okay? Once you shift those events and have a Thursday crucifixion, all right? So, let's go back. See the shift? So we go from a Friday Erev Pesach and then back to a Thursday Erev Pesach. Okay. Now, hopefully I'm going to publish all this information one of these days, but we'll see. All right. Now, so that's Jewish events. Now, what have we seen? Jewish events here in blue, all Jewish days events, shifted one day to the left, Passover Eve, Erev Pesach. Now it's shown on Thursday, which is still Nisan 14. Notice the Nisan 9 Sunday here, but here, Nisan 10. So notice the Jewish days have changed, but the days of the week are the same in the top part of the chart. Okay? I know this is kind of hard to keep up with. All right. The first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread is now shown on Friday, which is still Nisan 15. It is now plausible that the presentation of lambs by the Jews for sacrifice to the temple up here could have been the same time Jesus entered Jerusalem, presented himself as the Messiah right here. And I know the chart is pretty hard to see, particularly for you guys in the back of the room. Sorry about that. But anyway, these events could have lined up. Pontius Pilate may have come into town at the same time that Jesus presented himself and that the Jewish lambs were presented at the temple. Okay? Now, that's Jewish events. Let's go look at Jesus events. Okay? Nothing in this chart changes at all until we get down to this bar right here. I'm going to page back and forth just a couple of times so you can see that. This is a Thursday crucifixion. Let me go back to Friday crucifixion. None of these events. Now, the charts were done separate times so that they skew a little bit or whatever, but the timeline really is the same. I should have gone back and redone the charts, but they're a lot of trouble. But notice that the times do not change. Okay, so let's go back to Friday. Notice all these events are staying the same. Can you see any changes there? Until we get down to here. That is a partial day of rest in Bethany. If we have a Thursday crucifixion, then he would have had a partial day of rest in Bethany, okay, on Wednesday. On Wednesday. If he had a Friday crucifixion, we would have had almost 2 days of rest in Bethany with no recorded events. I think highly unlikely, okay? I think this gives another credence that maybe he was crucified on a Thursday, okay? So let's go back to our Thursday crucifixion. All right. So that's the only thing that changed. That got shorter, okay? The crucifixion date shifted back. Let me go back to Friday. So Friday crucifixion lines up here with Nisan 14 Friday, okay? When we go to Thursday crucifixion, it shifts back, okay? Still Nisan 14, but now on Thursday. All right? Does that make sense? I got some nods. That's good. I like nods. Nods are good. All right. So let me just recap. He could have come into Jerusalem the same time they're sacrificing lambs or presenting lambs for sacrifice. The almost 2 days of rest in Bethany now becomes just a partial day of rest on Wednesday only. Makes sense that you have a day of rest, and the gospel writers would not have written about it. Okay, 2 days of rest seems kind of unlikely that the gospel writers wouldn't have written anything about that at all. Okay, the travel from Bethany to Jerusalem is now on late Thursday is now late Wednesday, and the trials, crucifixion of Jesus now happen on Thursday, but it's still Nisan 14. Okay, we've not changed anything about the Jewish calendar. We're just changing things. We're just shifting it in relationship to our calendar, to our days of the week. Okay, makes sense? Got some nods? Got a couple of nods. That's good. All right. So there we go. I guess that's all I need to say about that. Now, another thing I showed you last week was a possible timeline of the last 24 hours of Jesus' life. Okay, this chart is exactly the same, whether you assume a Thursday crucifixion or a Friday crucifixion. The last 24 hours are the same. These are all the events. Events in red are associated with Jesus. Blue events associated with Peter when he denied Jesus right here. His first denial, his second denial is really hard for me to see. Probably hard for you to see too. Brown events are associated with Judas. Judas returns the 30 pieces of silver. He betrayed him at midnight, returning the pieces of silver that morning, probably. Again, some of this stuff can be shifted around a little bit time-wise. Some of the stuff could be shifted in sequence a little bit, but this is my assumption of how the events went, given the strict guidelines that I have to go by. Okay, I know that the trial to have a legal Sanhedrin trial had to be at daylight. Okay, so that kind of pegs a time starting point for all this. I know the crucifixion happened at 9 a.m., right? Because Mark tells us that in his gospel, and it went to 3 p.m. Okay, so all this stuff has to be fitted into this particular timeline before the crucifixion events at 9 a.m. All right. So whether I know the exact timeline order or the exact timeline place, was it 6:30? Was it 6:45? I don't know, but it's probably pretty close because we're forced to be into a certain line of thinking. Things had to have happened in a certain order and sequence of events at a certain time to fit it all in. All right. So all these events are the same. Green are words from Jesus from the cross. His first one was, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Eli, sabachthani, Father, why have you forsaken me? We talked about all these sayings last week, and he says, it is finished. We talked about how significant that was, and he didn't say, I am finished, but it is finished. So anyway, you can go back and look at the video on that. Purple are trials of Jesus over here. There should be 6 purple events here. Again, the timeline can be a little bit different, but you got to fit it all in the time that we have. The chart assumes trials 1 through 2 in the middle of the night. Peter's denials in the middle of the night. Jesus in prison from 2 to 5:30-ish at Caiaphas' palace. Trials 3 through 6 happen very early, perhaps from 5:30 to 8 a.m. in the right-hand darkness area. This one right over here, okay, on the very far right side of the chart, was the beginning of the Passover, Passover / Festival of Unleavened Bread. Okay, that was the beginning of the Passover. So the burial and sealing of the tomb had to happen soon after the crucifixion. Okay, now, as I mentioned, this chart is the same no matter which theory you use for the crucifixion of Jesus, whether Thursday or Friday. All right, I actually tried to go through, and I told Shelley I've had kind of a frustrating couple of weeks. I was putting together a chart of when Jesus was born and when he died, and there's some, I don't want to go into this too much, but there's little pieces of evidence all along the way. John the Baptist's ministry started in the 15th year of Tiberius, so that would have been AD 29-ish, okay? So that pegs when Jesus' ministry started, because it started about 6 months to a year after that. We know that Jesus' ministry was 3 to 3.5 years, okay? So all these different things that we know, and I said in the chart that I was trying to put together, I said just the facts, ma'am. So I just laid out all the facts that we know. And I was trying to mesh all that into some sort of coherent timeline of when he could have been born and when he could have died. And I had a chart with all the reds and greens and yellows about, yes, it fits this timeline. And I got so overwhelmed I couldn't do that. I spent probably a couple of days on that one chart. If I ever publish this book, I'll go and try to really resurrect that study again and see if I can figure that out. But anyway, enough said about that. Big thank you to Kenny Loy. Thank you, Kenny. Oh, wait, Kenny, you're not here. Kenny and Joanne planned their vacation around this class. I appreciate that so much. And I went longer than I thought. Surprising. But thank him for taking videos of the class, editing the videos, which is a huge undertaking. Their dog at home is very familiar with my voice now because he edits my videos at their house. So the dog welcomes me like I'm part of the family now. It's kind of funny. And for posting videos and handling everything about the YouTube channel, I don't really do anything with the YouTube channel at all. He does it all, and it's a huge, huge job. And I really can't thank him enough for doing that. Also, thank you to Donnie. Now, I told Donnie, I first told him, I said, it's going to be 6 months. Yeah, we can do that in 6 months, easy. Well, you've been very kind in letting me go. Yeah. Don't count. I started in January. It's now October. I don't know. We'll see. And we're going to give him a mug here in a minute. Yeah. All right. So thank you, Donnie, very much for letting me go over way over. All right. Also, the elders for giving the opportunity to share this information with the congregation. I appreciate that very much. Also, my wife for putting up with me. She's surprised. For putting up with me, I was writing the book, putting up with me, was preparing the class, and putting up with me in general. You don't have to agree with everything I say. Okay. And also all of you who attended for your very kind and encouraging remarks. I know some of you have been taking notes, trying to keep up with my fast talking. I'm sorry. I'm so fast, but I did have a lot of material to cover. If I ever teach this class again, I will probably ask for a year. And that way I can probably slow down a little bit, take it a little more easy. Thank you for your attention to the material. Thank you for laughing at my jokes sometimes. Okay. Now, if I told Donnie had some extra charts that I didn't have to do necessarily, but if you are interested in this kind of thing, I was teaching classes across town at a Tuesday night Bible class, and I taught 3 or 4 classes there. And one time they asked me, put together a chart next time you come of where all you've been when you've traveled. When I traveled internationally a good bit for work, and when I traveled internationally, I would usually travel to some place in Europe, like London or Paris or Amsterdam or Zurich or wherever. Okay, I traveled someplace, and then go on to Abu Dhabi where I did my work, spend a week there, and then come back and stop in Zurich or Amsterdam, wherever, okay, and spend a couple of days. So I'd take my vacation time, but the flights were free. I'd have to pay for vacation and hotels, but everything else was kind of paid for, okay, if I rented a car or whatever. So these are some of the places that I traveled. Shelley and I traveled to Israel back in 2013 now. It's been a while. So again, I've told you this before, if you ever have a chance to travel to Israel, please do so. I actually consider putting together a trip to Israel maybe sometime. I don't know how much trouble that would be, but it'd be kind of fun. Maybe we'll all go together, right? Y'all come along? All right, good. If you go to Israel, go to the Israel Museum. You'll see the Jerusalem model, the Herod sarcophagus, Caiaphas ossuary. We've talked about these things. You'll see a Heliodorus stele. You don't remember it, but we talked about Heliodorus back when we talked about the Seleucid. He killed Seleucus IV. The Pilate stone, which was actually found in Caesarea, the trumpeting stone, which is at the top of the temple. It said this is the place of trumpeting, and they found that in the rubble down at the bottom of the Temple Mount. The Shrine of the Book contains probably most of the Dead Sea Scrolls at the Israel Museum, and the Crucifixion nailed from the time of Jesus, which I've talked about a couple of times. Masada is there, very highly rated, very important to go to if you're there. Gamla. Not a lot of people go to Gamla. You'll be pretty alone out there. I mean, we were out there with, I don't know, maybe 24 people total, 36 people maybe, over this vast territory. You can stand up on top where Vespasian stood when they're getting ready to take Gamla, or you can hike down, which we did not do. We didn't have time. You can hike down to actually Gamla and go in the city, the ruins of the city. We talked about that in the destruction of Judea in the broad sense. That was the first place they took in Galilee, or the region of Galilee, when Vespasian came along and took over, and later Titus. The Yagdal Museum, they have the Jesus boat, which we talked about. The Temple Mount, I would highly recommend doing that, but there's certain rules you need to follow. If you do that, talk to me first or go look online to see what you need to do to go up there. Baltimore, Maryland. Now, if you're not comfortable with international travel, but you do domestic travel, then Baltimore is kind of an interesting place to go. Okay, they have a Ptolemaic mummy at Johns Hopkins University. It's just sitting out in a display case. Kind of cool. If you go to Washington, D.C., the Museum of the Bible is pretty cool. They have the National Geographic Museum. They have special exhibits every now and then. We saw an Egyptian exhibit there at National Geographic. We saw an exhibit on Alexander the Great. They were phenomenal exhibits. So keep your eyes open for those kind of things if you're interested in traveling. London, I went to the British Museum. They got a lot of stuff there. The Rosetta Stone, Ptolemy artifacts, the Parthenon marbles from the Acropolis, part of the Temple of Artemis. We talked about the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. The Assyrian Palace release, the Cyrus cylinder, back to the time of releasing, letting the Jews go back to Jerusalem. The Black Obelisks of Shalmaneser III, way back in time. And the Royal Cubic, we talked about the Royal Cubic and the Standard Cubic at the time. I've got a calculator on the website that can calculate between those various values. Paris, the Louvre. They have the Great Sphinx of Tanis, the Code of Hammurabi, the Venus de Milo, not really, well, yeah, it is kind of in our timeline, 150 to 125 BC, a goddess from the Hellenistic period. And of course, the Mona Lisa, which has nothing to do with our history whatsoever, but that's kind of the thing at the Louvre, right? You got to go see the Mona Lisa. It was painted in the early 1500s, okay? And then Atlanta, Shelley and I and Kenny and Joanne went 2 or 3 months ago now, I guess. They had a special exhibit in Atlanta. So you just kind of keep up with stuff that's happening. And they had the James Ossuary there. And I talked about that at the time, how important, how pretty cool that was. And they had a bunch of different artifacts there in Atlanta. So that's a response to the question that I had in that class. Okay. Now, I know that some of you are working on things, books. I know some of you are working on other things, and you might be maybe discouraged or whatever, because I can kind of relate to that in writing my book. There were times when I thought, I just don't know if I can finish this. I just don't know if I can do this. It's such an overwhelming task. I remember as a kid, I read Adam Clark's commentary, I think is his name. Gone totally blank. Really thick commentary. I think he's Methodist. I didn't read the whole thing, but I said, how does somebody write something like this? It just blows my mind that somebody could write something like this. And then I ended up writing a pretty big book, you might argue. And I think the only way you do that is just perseverance. You just go. You just do it. You just go. If you have a dream, I'm encouraged to follow that dream. The most difficult thing is decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity, according to Amelia Earhart. Pray as though everything depends on God, and work as if everything depends on you. The pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects a change. The realist adjusts the sails. People should pursue what they're passionate about. That will make them happier than pretty much anything else. Okay? I never lose. I either win or learn. And don't wait. The time will never be right. Okay? My journey began back in 1994. It took me 25 years to write the book. There were years I didn't write a single word. I was saying to myself, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this anymore. It's taking so much time and so much effort. And there are years that I wrote thousands of words and did tens or dozens of charts. Okay? So, pursue your dreams, whatever that is. Now, would I change anything? This has been a total money loser for me. The travel, the buying of coins, the buying of various artifacts, total money loser for me. Would I change a thing? No way on earth would I change anything. My dad said to me before he died, I am more proud of what you did in writing that book than I am in anything that I've ever done. Let me tell you about my dad. Got another couple minutes. He was an accomplished guy. He was the youngest at the time person to ever gotten a PhD from Georgia Tech in mechanical engineering. He was chairman of mechanical engineering at Tennessee Tech and then dean of engineering at Tennessee Tech. He wrote books, multiple books on heat transfer. He wrote some Shams outline. Those of you who are engineers are familiar with Shams outlines. Okay. He wrote a couple of Shams outlines on heat transfer. He traveled with ABET, the Engineering Technology Accreditation Board. Okay. He would go around to different countries, and he would be treated like royalty when he flew into some of these places. Saudi Arabia treated him like royalty because he was coming there to evaluate and accredit their universities. Man, he was an accomplished man. He said, I'm prouder of you writing this book than anything that I've done. Would I change anything? No. So, what do you want to accomplish today? Do you have a dream? Do you have an idea of something you want to do? Just do it. Now, this is kind of unlike my usual talk. I'm just deep in the history, deep in the artifacts, deep in everything. This is more philosophical, but just do it if you have a dream. I know some of you are doing it, and I think that's pretty cool. All right. Let me go through some selected resources. This is the stuff I was not going to, if we didn't have time, but I do have a little bit of time. Okay. Testament Press. This is a website that I wrote after I did the book. Put a lot of effort into it. There's a lot of information there. If you go to chapter 16, you'll see a figure there. If you can't figure out what that figure is, it's a little puzzle. This gives a solution to the puzzle here. It gives, if you have a book, there's words on the front cover of the book. Did you know that? For those of you that have a book, they're really, really hard to see. In fact, I made them probably too hard to see, but you can go to the website and you can see where the words are on the front cover of the book. Okay? If I do it again, I'll make them easier to see. Other puzzles, we have a word cloud on there. Okay, I have a errata on there for all the errors that I have in the book. I've got a lot of them. I don't have all of them in the errata. Some grammatical errors, things like that, I don't have in there. I've got a lot of calculators, this Jewish time calculator, a length calculator, a money calculator that I've talked about several times. I've got a timeline out there of the entire history from the end of the Old Testament all the way through AD 70 when Rome took over Jerusalem. So a lot of information out there on Testament Press. Also, I used David Hennon's Guide to Biblical Coins. He was very kind to verify some of the coins that I had, all the coins that I had, the bronze pruta and lepta that I had of the Judean rulers. Okay. The temple model kit, Scott Schneider. You can go to his site, etsy.com, shop Scott's Art Creative if you want to get this temple model. Comes with about 600 pieces, I think. I remember you just take some time to put together, but it turns out to be pretty cool, as you can see. The Quest by Lean Rittenmeyer. By the way, I sent Lean a book and also sent David Hendon a book as my thank you to them and what they've done. But he wrote this amazing book called The Quest, and he goes through all the details of the Temple Mount, things that he discovered there when he was actually digging around up there and wandering around up there. Jerusalem, History, Archaeology, Apologetic Proof of Scripture by Galen Wimmers. I think he might send you a free book. He sent me a free book a couple of times, but the book is also on there in PDF form. You can go through and look at. Really good. If you're getting ready to go to Jerusalem, he goes into all the details of what this rock means and what this wall means and all this stuff in this particular book, Jerusalem. Okay. Bible Mapper. This is how I did all my maps. David Barrett was the guy that did that at BibleMapper.com. It's a pretty cheap application, like $30-$40 or something. World History Maps by Thomas Lessman. That's how I did all my world history type maps, my bigger maps. And then BiblePlaces.com, Dr. Todd Boland. Todd's been very good to me, too, about putting me on his blog and stuff. I wrapped up in just a perfect amount of time. Thank you all, again, from the bottom of my heart for being here and being very kind and being very gracious to me and saying some nice things to me.